Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, The Emerging Regulatory and Legislative Landscape of Cell-Cultured Meat. My name is Kristen Hildreth, and I'm a Policy Specialist for NCSL's Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee, and I'll be your moderator for today. This is the second to last webinar in the committee's 2019 Spring Webinar Series. In total, we'll have hosted 6 webinars on a variety of topics, including carbon capture and storage, how states can prioritize traffic safety injury prevention strategies, how experts are attempting to avoid a patchwork of legislation within new transportation technologies, the future of plastic from production to disposal, and the various policy options legislators are considering, and the policies that are shaping the future of the nation's electric grid. To view past webinars, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org. Heading back to our focus today, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items prior to introducing our speakers for this webinar. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement. For over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat box, so please feel free to type in your questions and answer any questions in the chat box, which is in the lower right-hand side of your screen. To begin building some comfortability with the chat function and to also learn who is on the line today, I invite you to type in the state from which you are calling now. We'll hold a formal Q&A after both presenters are finished presenting. As a reminder, our webinar today is being recorded, and registrants will be able to access a recording of the webinar and presentation slides on NCSL's website after the webinar completes. After the series concludes, we'll send out a notice with a link to access these resources. And additionally, you can download the presentation slides being used today by clicking on the Resources tab in the Speaker Bios in the Speaker tab at any time. Now that our housekeeping is out of the way, let's get back to why we're here today. In 5 years, will your meat be raised from calf to steer in a green pasture or grown from stem cells in a petri dish? The biotechnology enabling cell-cultured meat is becoming more prevalent and accessible, with federal regulators recently defining their roles with respect to regulation and oversight of the production and labeling of human food produced from cultured cells of amenable species. The National Academy of Sciences estimated in 2018 that the products of cellular agriculture will be readily available in the marketplace within the next 5 years for consumers to purchase. Today, we'll be joined by policy experts to discuss some of the major issues at play in both the federal and state arena, including state labeling requirements and federal regulation of the product. Our 2 speakers today are Matthew Michael, Director of Issuance of Staff in the Office of Policy and Program Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Safety and Inspection Service, as well as NCSL's own Doug Farquhar, Director of our Environmental Health Program. First up, we're joined by Matthew. Matthew has been with the U.S. Department of Agriculture since 1993, serving in positions overseeing policy analysis and development, program evaluation, and regulatory enforcement. He has worked for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, the Agricultural Marketing Service, and the Food Safety Inspection Service. Currently, he serves as the Director of FSIS Issuance Staff, which is responsible for the development of policy and regulatory documents regarding the safety and labeling of meat, poultry, and egg products. And he serves as the FSIS liaison for the March 2019 agreement between USDA and FDA regarding the oversight of human food produced using cell culture technology. Matthew is here today to give us an overview of the federal arena, specifically an update on that agreement. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Go to my first slide here. So I am Matthew Michael. I'm from the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, or FSIS. If you're not familiar with FSIS, we're the agency within USDA that ensures the safety and accurate labeling of meat, poultry, and pasteurized egg products. We do this through inspection of domestic and imported product testing, and other types of regulatory oversight, such as in-commerce surveillance of products, label reviews and approvals, etc. And through our recently announced agreement with FDA, we've set forth our plans to ensure the safety and accurate labeling of food products derived from the cultured cells of livestock and poultry, amenable to the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Poultry Products Inspection Act. So what I'll be specifically discussing today are a definition of animal cell culture food technology. What is it? A petition we received on cultured food products from the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, a joint public meeting that USDA and FDA held last fall on this topic, and a subsequent agreement that was issued in March of this year on the oversight of these products and the future plans of both agencies in regard to the oversight of these products. So animal cell culture food technology, it's a long name. This is a technology, this is a definition developed by FDA, but we agree with it here in USDA. It encompasses cell cultured products made from any and all animals, whether amenable to the meat and poultry statutes or to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And for example, that would be seafood other than saluriformis fish or catfish, which are now regulated by USDA. So the definition is animal cell culture food technology refers to the controlled growth of animal cells from livestock, poultry, fish, or other animals, their subsequent differentiation into various cell types, and their collection and processing into food. Basically, the cells are collected from an animal in the same way a biopsy would be conducted. The cells are banked, and master cells are selected to use for proliferation or growth. After they've had some growth, the master cells are then differentiated into the types of cells a firm wants for a specific food product. So there could be cells that produce lean muscle, cells that produce connective tissue, cells that produce fat, all three, whatever it is they want to, whatever kind of food they want to create. The cells are then grown out, typically in what's called a bioreactor. It looks like a big vat or a tank, similar to what you'd see in a brewery. Once a firm has enough cells to make food products, the cells are harvested from the bioreactor and then processed. We imagine or think in the same way traditionally produced meat and poultry would be processed. Now that's a really broad overview of the technology, and as firms start producing cells at a marketable scale, their processes may differ based on the species, the type of food, the volume of product, etc. So USDA and FDA, we're both aware of a number of firms developing this technology to produce cell cultured food, and we've held public meetings on the safety and labeling of these products. We've received thousands of comments from industry and consumers. We've agreed to a joint framework for regulation. And last February, USDA received a petition from the U.S. Cattlemen's Association regarding the potential labeling of products made using this technology. So the petition is from the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. We received it on February 9th, 2018. We received over 6,000 comments, I think 6,162 to be exact, since we received the petition and posted it online. If you want to see it, it's at www.regulations.gov, and the comments are there as well. It's still under consideration. We're still looking at the petition. It came with a wealth of supplementary material, so we're looking at it and the petition, other scientific, legal, economic information, as well as the information we received since we had our public meeting. So what did the U.S. Cattlemen request in their petition? They asked that we limit the definition of beef to product from cattle born, raised, and harvested in the traditional manner. They asked that we limit the definition of meat to the tissue or flesh of animals that have been harvested in the traditional manner. And interestingly, they didn't ask that we go through rulemaking or establish a regulation for this, but they asked that we put these definitions in what's called the FSIS Food Standards and Labeling Policy Book. The policy book is guidance. It's intended to help industry produce labels that are not false or misleading. Also in the petition, and this is significant given the types of comments received, the cattlemen ask us to apply these requirements to products that are made from plants or insects but are marketed or labeled to look like meat. So the petition is broader than just cell-cultured agriculture. It also applies to other types of products that look like meat. So we are still considering that petition in the comments. On October 23rd, 24th, USDA and FDA held a public meeting here in DC to discuss the hazards, oversight considerations, and labeling of cell-cultured food products. Neither agency at that time or now is actively regulating these products. So FSIS and FDA officials made presentations on the roles and responsibilities relative to the production and labeling of safe and wholesome food and our respective regulatory frameworks. We talked about our inspection systems, and we discussed these things as a basis for discussing what an oversight framework might be most appropriate for cell-cultured food products derived from livestock and poultry. We received over 300 written comments in response to the meeting from meat and poultry packers, processors, producers, firms intending to produce these cell-cultured products, consumer groups, individual consumers, and academia. If you'd like to see the comments, they are also on www.regulations.gov, and the transcripts and presentations from this meeting are online, and there is a link in this slide. So a few months after the meeting, and as a result of many of the issues discussed at the meeting and comments we received, USDA and FDA published a formal joint agreement on how we will, it's a framework for how we will eventually oversee the production, processing, and labeling of cell-cultured food products. And this agreement was signed and issued and released on March 7th, 2019. It's available on the USDA and FDA web pages, and I put a link in the slide. So this slide here has a Venn diagram that explains the jurisdiction, where they differ over these products and where they overlap. So FDA will have food safety authority over over the cell collection from the live animals, the banking of the cells, and then the growth and the differentiation of those cells. At the point the cells are harvested, authority will shift to FSIS. So when the cells are removed from the bioreactor, it'll shift to FSIS. So any establishment that harvests or processes cells will be required to obtain a grant of inspection from FSIS, and they will be subject to inspection under our statutes. We'll inspect these establishments every time cells are harvested. If the cells are inspected and passed, any cells that were to move to another establishment, say for cooking or processing, would receive a mark of inspection. If they're processed in the same establishment they're harvested, we'd carry out inspection as we do in any conventional meat or poultry plant, inspecting once per shift and apply marks of inspection to the end product. Also, you'll see from this diagram, FSIS will regulate product packaging and labeling and verify the accuracy of labeling, and I'll discuss that more in the next slide. So to sum up the agreement, FDA is going to regulate cell collection, banking, growth, and differentiation. At harvest, they'll transfer authority, so there is some possibility that we would be there at the same time, possible. Information that FDA collects during cell banking, growth, and differentiation, they will pass on to FSIS. We'll use it to look for any food safety issues. Anything we find later, we'll pass back to them as well. So the agreement sets up a framework for cooperating on inspection and oversight so we can ensure these products are safe. So what are our future plans when and if these products start being produced and are inspected and marketed? Well, Before a firm is allowed to produce cell-cultured food for distribution and commerce, it's going to have to undergo a pre-market consultation or assessment from FDA. FDA will examine all the inputs, including cells, media growth promoters, cell scaffolding, and the properties of pre-harvest cell material to ensure that they're safe and will produce safe food. FDA will also examine sanitation, good manufacturing practices, and each firm's required food safety plan. After this consultation, and if FDA determines the establishment can produce safe food, FDA would conduct routine inspection and records review. So any firm that wants to produce cell-cultured food is going to have to go through one of these pre-market consultations. And FDA is now actively encouraging industry to contact them to get the communication started on that. FDA and USDA are coordinating. We're coordinating on the context of these consultations, as well as the inspection procedures for both agencies, focusing on the handoff of inspection and at cell harvest. And we want to make sure we eliminate redundancy in regulatory requirements and inspection. We don't want to have duplicative requirements for these firms, as we would in other firms that might be under the jurisdiction of both agencies. FSIS is going to go through a public process to develop labeling requirements, and this is for these products. And this is directly relevant to the Cattlemen's Petition and many of the comments we've received. It likely will include rulemaking. We will be in coordination with FDA. Any labeling requirements or rubrics we put out, we want FDA to agree to. We want labeling to be consistent for products derived from livestock and poultry and for fish, so that consumers understand what it is they're purchasing. We'll agree on the principles to assure that that's consistent. And per our authority under our statutes, we will be pre-approving any and all labels of products cultured from the cells of livestock and poultry. So that will include whatever requirements we end up promulgating after the public process, as well as any claims that a manufacturer of these products would want to make. And then finally, at this time, USDA does not anticipate issuing any new inspection regulations for the production of this product. We believe our existing HACCP and sanitation regulations are adequate to ensure the safety. And once the cells are harvested and processed, the activities are very, very similar to what would happen with the processing of traditionally harvested and processed meat. So we think our extant requirements for HACCP analysis, hazard control, and sanitation are adequate. We will be issuing instructions to our inspectors, because this will be a technology they haven't seen before, and possibly guidance to industry. And
great. Thanks so much for that, Matthew. Thanks so much. I think that was a great update, and it's great to hear what the federal government is doing surrounding that agreement. So now that we've had a chance to hear a bit about what's going on in the federal arena, we're joined by NCSL's Program Director for Environmental Health, Doug Farquhar. Doug has over 25 years of experience working with policymakers on environmental and health issues, and has directed the environmental health program at NCSL for 21 of those years. So he's been with us for a while now. He's testified before legislative committees over 50 times in 31 states, in addition to having consulted with state agency staff in every state on a variety of issues. Prior to coming to NCSL, Doug worked in the Texas House of Representatives and also on Capitol Hill here in Washington. He's currently an adjunct professor in the Denver University Graduate School of Environmental Policy and Management and at the Colorado School of Public Health. Doug's here to give us an overview of the state legislative landscape surrounding cell-cultured meat and the nuances behind it. Doug, thanks so much for being here today, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Kristen. To begin with, I'd like to talk a little bit about cell-based meat. One of the biggest issues that we've had to work with when tracking state legislation on this topic is what to call it. Many states have come up with different terminologies. What do we want to deem it? Trying to figure out the best single word to capture what's going on out there. But basically, it really comes down to the fact that these bills and this legislation from states is really looking at trying to limit the terms for beef and meat to products that are from animals, that they are harvested in a traditional manner, and that they are not coming from any new technologies. One of the interesting things about this is how it differentiates from plant-based meats. Essentially, if you have meat or substitute meat products out there, it's either plant-based, which is what we see with the Impossible burgers or tofurkey or burger or soy burgers. But now we have this new technology that's coming on, cell cultured meats, and this lab-raised meat makes things a little bit more challenging for the industry. With plant-based meat, one, at this point, it hasn't completely replicated the taste, the look, the feel of animal-based meats. There's still a little bit of a difference there. Now that's, technology keeps on getting better and better, and these plant-based meats are becoming more and more like animal-raised meats, but they haven't quite got there yet. With cell-cultured meat, there shouldn't be no difference between this meat and meat that's coming from animal-based. So it's going to taste the same. It's going to be the same, essentially. The difference is it could be designed. It could be designed to be a healthier piece of meat. It could be designed to be leaner. The more expensive cuts, the ones that the cattlemen generally get higher value for, those could be replicated. And on the other hand, it could have less environmental impact. It's going to have fewer methane emissions. It's going to have less impact on the groundwater. Basically, the environmental footprint will be smaller with a cell-cultured meat product than it would be with traditional cattle. And moreover, it will likely cause an incomplete disruption to the current agricultural system. If you have less demand for animal-based meat, that puts a pressure on all the slaughterhouses, all the acreage out there for meat, all the hog farms, the poultry producing facilities. You're going to have a situation where you're going to have less demand for soy and corn needed to feed the animals. It could have completely turn the animal agricultural industry on its head. So it could have a huge impact on the future of animal agriculture. So there's some legitimate reasons why there'd be fear and trepidation about the rise of this product. But it reflects a very important need that's going on out there. The demand for meat is growing. Developing world is making their tastes are becoming more like first world nations. They are wanting more meat. They are wanting higher quality meat. China has made a very aggressive effort to respond to consumer demands for more pork, for more beef. They have made a very conscious effort to say that we are going to get into the animal agricultural business, and that was most reflected in the fact that a Chinese company purchased Smithfield Foods, which is a U.S. pork manufacturer. Other very interesting things now is Kentucky Fried Chicken is the most popular restaurant in Shanghai. We have McDonald's selling burgers in India. So the taste of the demands for meat worldwide is growing, and the demands for all types of meat is growing. The Impossible Burger, which is a new product that is coming out, Burger King made a point to have that on its menus in many of its franchises, and the company is unable to keep up with demand for this product. So there is a demand out there for plant-based burgers. There's a demand out there for meat. And it's going to put pressure on industry to try to respond to that. And one of the ways they're going to respond is with cell-based meats. Now, as I was mentioning, we saw 41 bills relating to cell-based meat introduced this year in 26 states. Which is a dramatic increase from what we saw in the past. And previously, really the only state law out there was the bill in Missouri a couple of years ago. This year, we saw half the states introducing legislation, and for the most part, they all said the same thing, which was we want to make a demand. We want to ban the term meat being applied to not only plant-based meat but also cell-based meat. Now, the Missouri statute was very interesting. That was enacted last year. It brought forth the idea that plant-based meat is not considered meat, and that it should be banned in the state. It led to a lawsuit from the plant-based meat industry, and they claim that it criminalizes truthful speech by prohibiting a product as meat. And they said it was the term was vague, and the statute was overbroad. What has happened recently is the lawsuit has settled. The Missouri Attorney General's office has come up with an agreement with the plant-based food industry, and basically they have agreed on the facts that if a product includes a prominent statement that it is made from plants, or if it's a veggie, or if they identify it as lab-grown or lab-created, that will qualify for an exemption under this statute. They would not be in violation of the statute. And so as long as there's a prominent statement on the front cover saying, tofu-based turkey, plant-based turkey, or this is a lab-grown or lab-created piece of meat, then it would not be in violation of the statute. So we have some court language out there that we can use, and we can apply to some of these other challenges that may occur with these other states that have adopted legislation. Louisiana just recently enacted a bill, 152, which I think reflects a lot of the sentiment of many of the state legislators out there. Now, this one goes beyond just cell-based meat, but it goes on all meats and all food products that are designed or produced by one product and intended and claimed to be another. As Senator Thompson has said, broccoli is not rice, cell-cultured meat is not meat, tofu burgers is not meat. They're starting to see products in their state that really is causing a great deal of consternation among several of these producers, and he wants to be able to take care of that. That's a very good overview of what we are seeing in that the states are adopting. As of today, we have seen 15 bills enacted in the state legislatures. 15 states have enacted laws that are related to cell-based meat and labeling, making sure it's labeled as such. If you include Missouri, that gives us 16 states that have enacted cell-based meat labeling laws. Maine's law is before the governor, so that could mean that we may have as many as 17 bills or 17 pieces of legislation by the end of the year. A very good example would be the Arkansas bill, Truth in Labeling bill, where they went beyond just cell-based meat, but they're also talking about rice when it is produced from cauliflower and other products. They're talking about pork and pork products that are coming out. But it will, the way it is written, will make a product such as the Impossible Burger illegal in that state, where you would be calling it a burger, so it is called a meat product. So this could be problematic in the future for people who are trying to market the Impossible Burger. Other laws along this line are like in Mississippi and Kentucky, where they are talking about products that should not be labeled as meat or meat products. In this situation, if USDA and FDA comes up with a labeling standard, and in case that labeling standard allows for the USDA inspected meat marker be placed on there, these laws could come into direct conflict with the federal regulation. And in that situation, the state laws will have to subside to the federal law. They will not be able to say that the Mississippi bill or the Kentucky bill would be able to supersede USDA regulations. And so therefore, we could end up with a direct conflict with these federal regulations if they go that direction. On the other hand, you could have bills out there. There are bills out there like what we see in Montana. And the way the law is written in Montana is they do not say that you can't say meat, but if you do have a cell-cultured product, that you have to identify it as such. So this would be a labeling standard that would go on in addition to the USDA and FDA label, meaning it probably be able to, it would not be in conflict with that and wouldn't have to have subside to the USDA FDA regulatory requirement. So we do see that there should be some opportunities out there for states to maintain their positions and be able to move forward with their policies without coming into conflict with USDA. A few other bills that I wanted to highlight out there: the South Carolina bill, the South Dakota bill. These are just a very good overview about what the laws are looking like out there, and some of the concerns that these state legislatures are seeing. With my final slide, I really wanted to just bring up some of the basic issues. The biggest questions we're really dealing with on this topic is the fact that we just simply don't know what these products will do, and what are going to be some of the consumer impact, or what are going to be some of the impacts on the consumer, some of the impacts on the market. Will they be a better way for us to provide for the meat sources that the world is demanding, or will this be a real negative impact on the animal agricultural industry, which would cause great consternation to many of our producers out there? From the consumers, when will it be available? When will we be able to go into a store and buy a T-bone made out of cell-based meat? How much will it cost? Will it be comparable? Will it be much more expensive? Will it be cheaper than conventional meat? Will it be healthier? Will we have any issues with any of the processes that are that this must be taken to get this meat? Will it provide for a healthier piece of meat? Will it be more nutritious? Will it have less calories? As I said, this will create designer meat, and that could be very attractive to the consumer. From the sustainability point of view, will it have a smaller environmental footprint? Will there be special chemicals or additives that generally we do not see in a regular, traditionally raised piece of meat? Will production be able to meet the market demand? Will we be able to provide the meat demands that we are seeing from the developing world? Will it be able to be sold overseas? Will there be blocks by some of our trade partners who will say that they would not allow cell-based meat to be imported into their countries? And will it can we have a system that is sophisticated enough that would effectively replace the animal-based agricultural system? And that could be a very challenging and also a very disrupting thought if that does occur, because we do see a very robust cattlemen's industry out there. There are many people, many ranchers. There are many people who work in slaughterhouses. There are many people who raise products that are needed for the animals in the animal-based industry. So this could have a real dramatic change on what we think of when it comes to animal-raised meat and what we come to think of as meat products that we serve for our families. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Kristen for questions.
Thanks so much, Doug. It's super helpful to know the trends across states and to take a deeper look at what we're actually seeing. Like Doug said, I'd like to shift gears to the final portion of today's webinar, question and answer. We have a few questions that we've already had sent in, but if you have a question, please type it in the box. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available to participants afterwards, so feel free to type in any and all questions. I guess I'll start off with one, and I actually kind of want to go back to Michael for this first one. Michael, you touched on the petition from the Cattlemen's Association and the over 6,000 comments you all received. Can you categorize some of those comments for us? What did they look like?
Sure. The majority of the comments opposed the petition, and the majority of the comments also were form letters. And I don't have an exact count, but I suspect from going through them and looking at the summaries from the staff that quite a bit of the opposition is because in this group, or much of it is because the U.S. Cattlemen's Petition applies to the plant-based products as well as the cell-based. So the majority did oppose the petition. 6 out of 25 livestock industry organizations opposed the petition. It's not that they weren't sympathetic to it, they just preferred a different sort of labeling schema. The cellular agricultural companies opposed the petition, not surprisingly. Plant-based producers opposed, some consumer organizations, animal welfare organizations, and some healthcare nonprofits also opposed. In contrast, all the livestock producers who commented on the petition supported it, and 19 out of the 25 livestock industry groups supported it, and about 50 consumers supported it and wanted to limit the use of the words meat and beef to traditionally raised and harvested animals. Mm-hmm. So even though this isn't a rulemaking, we'll probably be looking at the comments as we do, or we will be as a rulemaking, and we don't really count them up and give them more weight. It's the salient issues raised is what we'll be considering. So that's what we're breaking down. Of all the 6,162 comments, there are probably about 25, 30 issues raised that we'll be considering.
Great, thanks for that.
Sure.
Looks like we have a question in the chat box that's also geared. So it is from Connor Arrington, and it Right, so it appears that a number of states are concerned with safety and nutritional elements of the cell-based meat. How confident is USDA and FDA that the cell-based meat will be safe in the long term, and do you have any information on that?
I'm not aware of any such studies, and that's likely because the product hasn't been produced to scale or on the market. It's a relatively new technology. I can say that, as I mentioned in my presentation, any firm that wanted to produce cell-cultured foods has to undergo this pre-market assessment with FDA. Well, they'll be looking at all the inputs, the outputs, the sanitation, the practices, and they have significant experience in this realm with cell biologics, drugs produced using the exact same technology. And we'll be working with them to look at any hazards that could arise not only through production but also in processing.
Good to know. And I guess this one kind of goes along the same vein. So obviously you touched on this in your presentation, where FDA is going to oversee cell collection, cell bank, cell growth, and USDA will oversee the production and labeling of the food products from the harvested cells. We're talking about safety, but this is also kind of along that vein. What might that inspection regimen look like, and where does FDA's jurisdiction end and USDA's begin in order to prevent duplicative inspections?
Well, the authority for inspection, or the jurisdiction over the product, will transition when the cells are harvested from the bioreactor or some other device where the cells are grown. We are working, as we're working in any plant under dual jurisdiction, to reduce any duplication or redundancy. I'd say that, to some extent, the authorities here are similar to what they are for traditionally produced livestock and poultry. FDA has authority over food animals raised on the hoof until they're presented for slaughter. And then when the animals are presented for slaughter, that authority shifts to USDA FSIS. And so it's not unlike that. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's not unlike that. But in cell biologics, FDA does the pre-market consultation and then inspects at some frequency based on the risks they see, the type of products. They have a lot of record-keeping requirements. The plants are required to produce what are called batch records for every batch of product. We're working with FDA so that those records will be transferred to our inspectors that will understand them. Under our statutes, every time cells are harvested, we will be there, and for processing of meat and poultry products, we inspect once per shift.
Great, thank you. And we have another question that's geared towards FDA and USDA, but I want to jump to states for a second. Doug, do we anticipate more states taking up these labeling restrictions to these quote-unquote meat products in their next sessions, given that the federal government has begun to take steps to categorize their responsibilities in regards to them?
Well, I think that depending on what USDA, FDA comes up with, will reflect how many states take up this issue. As said earlier, we saw half the states come up with legislation this year, and now we're at a point where we have several bills have been enacted, and some have, and Missouri's bill has undergone a court challenge. So it seems like we have language out there that is acceptable to the courts as of now, which would warrant that this type of legislation, or at least certain of these types of legislation, would be acceptable in the future, and that they can come up with these labeling requirements that would not be in conflict with USDA, FDA requirements. Of course, the caveat with all that is just depends on what USDA and FDA come up with, and what will their labeling requirements state, and would there be a direct conflict with some of these statutes. I'm under the assumption that they would not be. This seems to be an issue that is catching on quite quickly, as we said, we have gone from one bill to 15 bills enacted in just 2 years' time. So it's gaining quite a bit of momentum. So I'm envisioning in the future, or at least for the 2020 session, that we should see another robust round of legislation introduced on this topic.
Great, thanks for that. And then we have two questions along the lines of what type of, do we expect similar challenges? What kind of opposition has there been? So obviously we've seen legal challenges pop up in regards to these labeling laws that states are passing. Can we anticipate them continuing, and do you anticipate states facing a preemption battle given that USDA's labeling authority overrides that of states?
Well, I don't anticipate a preemption battle, so to say, because I'm under the assumption that USDA and FDA are going to be very cognizant of what the states have already adopted and do their best not to put states into an awkward position where they would be preempted. I'm giving a great deal of faith within the regulatory system. But that being said, each one of these laws are just slightly bit different. So as I said, certain laws like what we saw in Mississippi and Kentucky, they could end up being in conflict with USDA mandates if the USDA places on there that this is meat. If we have a situation out there where we can avoid that issue, like we saw in Missouri, where the Attorney General simply said, as long as you identify this as a lab-based meat or a cell-based meat or a plant-based meat, you would not be in conflict with the law. And as long as that attitude is reflected and is reiterated among the other state and mostly the court systems in the other state, then we should be in a situation where we would not be in conflict and we wouldn't have preemption issues with the federal statutes.
Great, thank you. And do you see any other challenges popping up within states themselves in regards to these labeling laws that we're seeing? Do you see any states sticking out to you?
Well, I think part of that's going to really be depending on if a state law is drafted that is going to be that is really going to prohibit the sale of a certain meat-based product. So either if they said if it's cell-based, or if it's plant-based, or even if you have a situation out there where some of the products like we're seeing in Arkansas and Louisiana, where you're selling rice that's based on cauliflower or tofu burgers or some other things. If you get a situation now that's going to prohibit the sale of certain products, then yes, you will see some conflicts, and I'm anticipating that the market would respond to that. If you get a situation out there where we can work it out, like we did in Missouri, then I think we can avoid any court challenges from these laws.
Great, thank you. And I guess this would kind of go to both of you. So right now, where a rule requires the use of the term quote-unquote imitation meat when a packager using plant or cell-based meat analog products, what is the application of that? And can you describe kind of when that imitation is required, that imitation labeling is required? And I guess, Doug, maybe you could speak to this in terms of state labeling.
Well, state labeling, I'm not, haven't seen it to be that detailed regarding imitation products. And again, as we said, this is kind of a new area that we are delving into where, in the past, really, we didn't have to worry about plant-based products or cell meats because the technology wasn't there. One of the things we often see is that technology in the business community is much more nimble than the regulatory community, meaning they can come up with new products and new technologies much faster than the states or the federal government can respond to it. And as slow as the states may be, they are much more nimble than the federal government, as we see from these bills. When the technologies come out, and the states or legislatures will be able to introduce several pieces of legislation almost immediately trying to respond to it. We haven't seen anything come out of Congress yet. I'm not assuming we will see anything in the near future, and it's just because Congress doesn't work that quickly. So I think we got a situation here where we do not know what is coming down the pike regarding new technologies and new products that are going to be considered, that some people may consider imitation, and how the states respond to it and how the federal government respond to it is going to be very much up in the air. But I think we're getting some sense about how what we're going to be hearing and what is going to be some of the issues that emerge with these technologies in the future.
I'll just add that in regard to the term imitation, it's not a labeling term that we work with a lot in USDA and FSIS just because of the nature of our statutes. We regulate commodities that are defined in large parts in our statutes or our regulations. For example, our regulations say meat is skeletal muscle. So if it were imitation skeletal muscle and made out of a plant, it would be under FDA jurisdiction, not ours. So imitation is not a term. We might see it as a secondary non-meat ingredient in a multi-ingredient product, but it's not a labeling term we work with a lot in FSIS. Has it been recommended as a qualifier for these products eventually? I don't recall seeing it in the comments. It could be in there. In regard to the question about clean meat, that has certainly been a descriptor that's been commented on. All across the spectrum, people in favor of it, people against it. We do approve all labels, and we do review all claims, and I think all claims, all labels can't be false or misleading in any particular. They can't be pejorative to other types of products, etc. But that's one we've heard of, clean meat. Imitation, not so much.
Great, thank you. And then I think we have time for one more question. In the chat box we have, will there be tests to determine if the meat is cell-based versus coming from a slaughtered animal?
That's an interesting question. We haven't really discussed it. At this time, most of the discussion has been for how to oversee the firms who are publicly producing this product for consumption. I suppose in the future, if there were a question of cell-based being substituted for something else, if it were to be scale up in the market that much, it'd be something we'd look at. I honestly don't know enough about the science to say whether we will or develop tests along that line.
Thanks for that. Well, I just wanted to thank you both for participating, Matthew and Doug. We greatly appreciate the expertise that each of you were able to provide us and our members with today. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar and the presentation slides will be made available. Our final webinar of the NRI Spring webinar series will be next Thursday, focusing on the major elements of grid modernization, and will allow our members to hear from experts and discuss the policies that are shaping the future of the electric grid. To register or find out more information on that, please email either myself or visit ncsl.org. Thank you again for your continued interest and support of NCSL, and have a great day.